Joseph, could you tell us about your experiences hound hunting? I think I've heard in the podcast that you hound hunted a little bit in your youth, or a lot of it.
I did. I'd call it a little bit, but for about 7 or 8 years, my brother and I had a pack of hounds. We started with 2, and then we had a female that had pups, and we kept 4 of the pups, so we had 6 for a while. We had a bloodhound Walker cross that was super cold-nosed, really great dog. And then we had, the rest are mostly a red bone and Walker cross. Real good tree dogs, maybe not quite as cold-nosed, but very aggressive. And we would generally hunt, I mean, this was back before radio telemetry was widely available. Government trappers and hunters that were funded and had some equipment provided to them had the radio telemetry collars and whatnot, but there was no such thing as a GPS dog collar. You couldn't tone them and call them back if they were way out across the canyons. If you lost your dogs, you had to track your dogs in the snow to find them again. And so, you know, many, many days I'd be on my horse following dog tracks that were following lion tracks in snow, and we'd eventually catch up with them. The area we hunted to was a non-motorized area. You couldn't take a snowmobile or a truck in there or whatever, so it was all horseback or on foot. And as I used to say, I've snowy rivered off the side of more than one canyon. Because when, as you know very well, when you get behind a good pack of dogs on a relatively hot track and there's just so much excitement in the area, you kind of tend to get carried away. And especially if you're trying to keep up with dogs running hard so you don't lose them, right? So most of our hunting was done on horseback. A lot of it, sometimes we'd get into heavy oak brush thickets and we'd have to get off the horses, and one of us would lead the horses out around this big thicket while the other one would sometimes crawl on hands and knees on dog tracks down through the oak brush for an hour or two till we popped out the other side.
Mm-hmm. And you're following the tracks because without GPS, they were just so far ahead of you couldn't hear them.
Right. Yeah. We would go out pretty early. We'd try and get riding in, that first hour after dawn, and we'd ride till about 2 o'clock. If we didn't have a fresh track by then, we'd leave, because you have 3 or 4 hours till dark, and without the ability to call your dogs back, and I mean, often we're getting out at 9,000 or 10,000 feet unloading from the horse trailer. It's going to be cold at night, and hounds are thin-haired. It's not real healthy for them to be out there in those elevations in 1.5 feet of snow or whatever the case was. But it was an adventure. It was expensive for a couple of teenagers trying to maintain a dog hound pack. Even back then, dog food cost a lot, but it was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you spend a fair number of days out looking for lost dogs before you had GPS and stuff?
No, we only lost dogs a few times, but we had pretty good horses, and we were fearless back then. We were teenagers, so yeah, we would ride through things and across things and down canyon sides that we never should have been riding down. I certainly wouldn't now, but at the time we were able to pull it off and keep up with the dogs, or at least find the dogs before dark in most cases.
And were you mostly hunting lions in the snow?
Usually, if there was at least patchy snow, like 30 or 40% snow, we could catch a lion in pretty short order. Mm-hmm. We never did get, the sorted dogs developed that would run lions 100% on dry ground. That's a really extreme art form of hound hunting that I've got a tremendous amount of admiration for, because it's hard. And those dogs are few and far between that really excel at that.
Yeah, to me that's sort of the pinnacle of it.
Yeah.
But you were mostly hunting in the snow, and how did the horses do in the snow?
Oh, fine. As long as you have good horses and it's not more than about 1.5 feet deep, they're fine. We had some adventures with the horse trailer and the truck. We hunted big canyon country, and often we're driving little gravel logging roads and whatnot, and sometimes you'd just about slide off the road into a big canyon and have to unload all the horses and put chains on the truck tires because you're pushing snow with your front bumper in some cases, right? And it got pretty hairy sometimes. But again, we were young and fearless.
And something that's asked on this podcast of sort of a lot of these guys who hunt on horseback is, do you prefer horses or mules for something like that? And now I guess you've got a lot of experience packing horses and mules too.
Mostly horses, yeah. I grew up with horses. My dad always said that a mule was an abomination. And so I always just kind of figured that, horses usually pretty personable. And then in 2011, I hunted with Sean Little of Snowy Springs Outfitters out of Kalispell, Montana. And he's mostly a mule guy. And he put me on a mule, and I'm not cussing here, I'm stating simple fact. Her name was Slut Whore. Naming mules is an art form. You have to be a mule man. He also had one named Ichabod and a couple others. Just fantastic. And we ended up hunting for 10 days in the Bob Marshall and some very gnarly country. And I rode that mule places that I would never take a horse. She was so incredibly steady and sure-footed that it totally changed my perspective on mules. They're horrible to ride at a gallop, right? They're real weird gaited at a gallop. So if you're trying to get somewhere in a hurry, a horse is better. But just for going hour after hour, day after day in very treacherous country, I'm a mule guy now. I like them both. I use horses mostly now because good mules are hard to find. They're very expensive.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
But man, I admire them.
And if you're going for your next pack animal,
I've got a couple of really good pack horses. So, not to throw another, wrench into the works here, but the next pack animals I hope to get are llamas.
Oh yeah.
For, backcountry hunting on foot. But yeah, I would love to own a mule to ride and pack as need dictated. Because again, as you get a little bit older, you get a little more adverse to getting hurt because it takes so much longer to heal and to recover and to rebuild your physical capability afterwards. And so, yeah.
Did you ever bear hunt with those dogs?
We did a couple times, but never successfully. Actually, catching a bear is a different ball game, as you know. And our dogs were so used to hunting cats that we never found a really fresh bear track in snow. Where we hunted, generally the snow came about the time the bears hibernated. Yeah. And then the hound pursuit season ended in the spring before they came out of hibernation. So it was kind of rare to find a good fresh bear track to trail, and never did get good at it.
What got you into the hounds as a teenager with your brother?
The romance of it. And there was an old houndsman, Stan McLean out of Tropic, Utah. Just a legend in that world down there. And somehow we got put in touch with him, and he said, come over and hunt with me a little bit. So we had an old truck and an old horse trailer, and we'd trailer our horses over to wherever he was hunting and just go out with him for a day whenever we had the opportunity. And one day he called and said, you guys stop by next time you come through. And he presented us with a hound puppy, just gave it to us, and it was out of one of his really good males. It's the half bloodhound, half walker
cross. I was
going
to ask you about that. That's an interesting.
Yeah, he was tall, rangy, he could go forever, and just had the happiest big sloppy grin you'll ever see on a dog's face. Wonderful dog. And he kind of became the foundation for our lion hunting endeavors going forward for about 8 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm. And then what got you out of it?
Oh, life. My brother stayed on the farm a little longer than I did, and so I ended up basically just turning all the dogs over to him. They were worth a fair bit, but they cost a lot to feed. And I just said, look, if you're willing to foot the bill to feed them, you take the dogs. I'm going off to college to find a woman.
Yeah, wise choice, a good trade. And another thing that gets asked sort of these, a lot of these old dry ground guys is, how many lines have you seen outside of the dogs? You've probably spent a lot more time behind a set of binoculars or a spotting scope than most houndsmen. Have you seen lions outside of dogs, and how many?
I have, but never in their natural habitat, only in a trap. We had a cat taking goats, sheeps, and that was funny, goats, sheep, turkeys, and geese from, well, they were my mom. My mom had all the small livestock, but she got pretty torqued over that. And we got the government trapper in, and he managed to trap the cat. So I saw that cat in a trap right on our farm there, right? Low country. But other than that, I know I've been close to a lot of cats in the backcountry, but I've never seen one aside from over hounds. They're, as you know, they're super secretive. Another element too was when we started hunting them, there were a lot of cats around, but they quickly got whittled back because they turned it into kind of an open over-the-counter unit type thing on a quota. And yeah, hounds are a good way to see cats. And without them, you're probably, in my experience, not going to see cats unless you live somewhere that they're never hunted with hounds and the populations are really high, then you might.
When you've sort of known that they're around but haven't seen them, how are you knowing that they're around you?
Tracks, generally, either fresh tracks in the sand or fresh tracks in the snow. Like if you hike out onto a point to glass the afternoon away, and as you're going out with your headlamp in the dark, there's tracks on your snowshoe trail. I've had that happen. And you know that cat followed your trail down, probably looked at you from behind and then went on his way.
Yeah. I guess it's good to know that they're looking at you and turning around. That's sort of comforting, but it's always a little bit uncomfortable in that situation.
There were several instances before they opened that unit to over-the-counter tags on a quota system that I think contributed to the Fish and Game Department's motivation to do that. I had a friend that was sitting glassing, and he looked over to his left, and there was it took him a minute to recognize it, but about 8 feet away, there's a cougar's tail protruding from under a sagebrush. And he looked real hard, and he eventually was able to discern the mountain lion's eyes looking through the top of the sagebrush at him from about 8 feet away.
Wow.
And it was just sitting there. He thought it was the coolest experience ever, but he's kind of a gnarly dude. He's not afraid of much. That same region down across the other side of that canyon, there was a power company employee who was looking for shed antlers. Thankfully had his handheld radio on him and happened into a lioness with yearling cubs, or even 2-year-old. They were almost adults. And they chased him up a tree.
Wow.
A big juniper tree. And he was there for 4.5 hours. He would throw pine cones at him and they'd scamper off chasing the pine cones. A couple times he climbed down because the female went and laid under a tree in the shade about 40 feet away. He'd climb down and quickly gather some rocks. They'd chase him back up the tree.
Wow.
He'd throw the rocks at him. They'd chase the rocks. And of course he'd radioed out as soon as he got treed by these lions.
Good role reversal.
Yeah. So the game warden came in with a couple other guys, and they wanted to try and shoot that female because clearly she wasn't teaching her young anything about respect for humans. And when they came in, the cat spooked off. They got a quick shot at the female but did not get her. And that was that. Another lady about 2 miles south of there was hunting deer, sitting on a kind of a finger that led into a meadow down below her where she'd seen several bucks coming, and she was on her own. She heard something behind her. Thankfully, she turned around, and there was a young adult about 20 feet away in full stalking mode, tail twitching, crouching, the whole thing. And she started yelling at it, throwing stuff at it, and it couldn't figure her out. It couldn't get a read on what she was doing, but it was clearly hungry. It was young. It was probably kicked off its mother and hunting on its own for the first time. And she finally shot it when her rifle barrel was nearly touching the cat's chest.
Whoa.
So it kept just slinking closer and closer and closer. And it would have jumped on her. It was one of the few instances of that. So can I tell you my favorite possible lion and human interaction things? Years ago, about 4 years ago, I heard from a source that I remember, this is where the story kind of comes unraveled, was a very reliable source, somebody I trusted that does a lot of research. For the life of me, I can't figure out who it was. There's about 20 individuals it could have been. And this person said he'd recently read a study conducted in Colorado and California on all the jogger attacks by mountain lions, right? Neither of these states have hound hunting, and there was, for about 10 years, there were a lot of joggers attacked. And this gentleman told me that they discovered a very unique characteristic that all of these people shared. They were vegetarians.
Yeah.
Yeah, I laughed my head off. I thought it was a joke. He's like, no, really.
Yeah.
And as such, all they could conclude is that they smelled like prey rather than a fellow predator. I love that. I've never been able to substantiate it, so it's purely anecdotal at this point, but what fun to think about that.
Yeah. No, I believe it. I mean, so much of our brains and an animal's brain is based on pheromones and chemicals and hormones. Like, I don't doubt that a vegetarian would smell different.
Sure.
That's very cool.